What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of X Factor Fantasy Football. And this is your week 2 recap with, I think personally the best fantasy football squad in America right now. We got my girl Jenna, we got Jordan, and obviously you got me, Swiper, man. It's been a very interesting start to the season. And again, I hope your teams are doing well. And if they're not, the good news is it's only the start of the year. You don't have too much to worry about, but this is the time to be really concerned with how you can build a championship roster from here on to the rest of the season. But Jenna, Jordan, how are y'all doing today?
The good news is we ain't your team.
Bounce back win, like I said, I need it. So I'm feeling great on Monday.
Wait a second, you're 1-1, Jordan?
For all intents and purposes, yeah. I don't.
Crazy intents and purposes.
But I have who do I have going? I have Nick Chubb going against a defense tonight. So I'm up 20 points. So I'm gonna assume that I should be okay. But if he goes out hurt or something, you never know.
Okay.
I should be fine.
Well, what defense does he have?
It might be the Saints.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
So I'm the only one still 2-0 in this league.
Look, Jenna is on the way to winning the ring, so I love it. All right. Wait, are you the only 2-0 person in our league right now? If things continue,
I'm talking about the people on the screen right now, not the whole league.
I got you. No, I love that. Yeah, this has been it's been a lot of fun, y'all. Let's just go ahead and get into it, y'all, because we have some really, really surprising performances in this week 2 mashup. Is there anybody on the top of your ledger that you can think about that came off with a performance that you did not expect?
Puka. I'll start. I have him on my team. Actually,
can you please call him what his name is? Is actually Cooper Kupp. He's not actually hurt. Cooper is fully healthy this season. He's just wearing a different number.
Yes, Cooper Kupp. But yes, Puka Nacua, rookie. I would say it's surprising. Some would say it's not surprising because he had a really good game last week and he was kind of not highly touted, but people who root for the Rams had him on their radar coming into the season. But I don't think anybody thought that he would follow up 15 targets and what he had last week with 20 targets and 15 receptions this week, and an even better week somehow topping last week. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I certainly didn't see it coming. I got him.
You didn't see it coming? You picked him up last week.
I didn't see that coming, though. Like, I had to start him because of Amari Cooper supposedly going down, but they're saying he actually might play tonight. So I kind of lucked up in that regard. But, yeah, I said it's going to start Puka or Christian Kirk. Turns out either would have been fine because Christian Kirk also had a good week. But I went with Puka and 30 points. I mean, what is that, 30 points, basically? Looking like you said, Cooper Kupp without Cooper Kupp's number. He was probably the most surprising person for me. I was expecting him to have a good week, but not like that.
So just for context, everybody, Puka Nacua right now is currently not wide receiver. He is currently player 3 in fantasy behind Tyreek Hill, the Dallas Cowboys defense, because of that 40-point ball last week. And he is 3rd, and he's ranked ahead of Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey. So, again, early season buys, but this is how important it is to make sure you're locking in on the waiver wire. So, Jenna, what about you? Any big performances you want to highlight?
Like on my team only or just in general?
Anybody in the league or team, whatever.
In one of my leagues, I do have Kirk Cousins. I had him on the bench, unfortunately, because he went off. He had a great performance week 2. I played Joe Burrow. I knew you would relate to this, Swiper, because I decided to have faith and not overreact after week 1 and play Joe Burrow, and Kirk did him in, outshined him big time, right? And Burrow comes back and gives me decent amount of points, but comparatively just not the same.
Right. Well, look, again, QB1 so far in the NFL season prior to tonight is Kirk Cousins with 45 points on the year. It's been a very strange start for the season. QB1 consensus basically coming into the year would have been Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes, if you look at his so far performances, it's not been great. It's been good, but it's definitely not what you paid for. He's currently QB5 behind. Oh, look at that. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson's on there. That's interesting. Everybody says he's bad. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, and Kirk Cousins. So, again, it's early season, but you really like the returns that you're getting so far. Somebody like Kirk. But Jenna, even if I'm looking at your roster, obviously Kirk did really well, but you started, I think, the biggest performance and surprise. Brian Robinson, out of absolute nowhere, had 28.9 points. Brian Robinson had 42 receiving yards, took multiple screens, multiple screens, and got yardage on all of them. Had 87 rushing yards. He had 1 2-point conversion. He had 2 receptions, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns. Like, that's an insane week for Brian Robinson. And again, going into the year, you could get Brian Robinson round 8, round 9, round 10. And a lot of people thought he was going to be in a handcuff situation with Antonio Gibson. And for him to be able to take over the split and the backfield usage like he has, it's been huge. So again, Jenna with another great pickup. I remember when you made that pickup at the time, I was like, well, decent starter, could be a dude you could flex out here and there. But again, it's just the way fantasy football works. Currently, Brian Robinson is running back 3 on the season. And this, again, let me just read this out for y'all. So top 5 running backs so far in fantasy. Christian McCaffrey. You got what you paid for. Tyron Williams, the backup to Cam Akers for the LA Rams. And then Brian Robinson is currently running back 3. And then behind him is Tony Pollard and Bijan Robinson. So, again, just another great pickup. And that's a really, really good performance. And I also want to shout out Kirk Cousins, y'all. Like, Jordan, with Kirk's performances, even versus the Eagles, we talked about this idea that he might be on the hate list in terms of players that we didn't trust going into that Eagles matchup. How surprised are you that he was able to have a day where he put up basically 38-plus points versus the Eagles secondary?
I mean, you're always going to be surprised with 38. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm shocked. I mean, I'm not surprised him putting up 38. I mean, that's a crazy day. I would say from a fantasy perspective, not as surprised, even though I didn't know if he would do well as far as like an actual game performance. Fantasy's weird because you can have a not as good day in real life, but you look at the fantasy stat sheet and you have a really big day. So in watching that game, I feel like Kirk played, fairly well, but he didn't play as well as 38 fantasy points would indicate. But hey, my fantasy team name is Stats Without Context for that very reason. I don't care how it comes. I just care that you put up the stats to. He was actually on my bench for that matchup, though. I ended up starting.
You started Dak?
Dak. It worked out. I started the reasoning for me starting Dak pretty much worked out. I want somebody steady, give me, 19 to 20 points. And I think that gave me like 19 points. I wanted the rest of the team to be able to carry. But yeah, it's a good problem to have. Usually they say when you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. It's not the case in fantasy. I have 2 good quarterbacks, and they're both viable options. So shout out to Kirk.
I feel like we were forgetting too that like it's so important in fantasy to just like take care of the football, right? Not throw interceptions. Yep. That works against you so easily. And I feel like the QBs that are actually way up there are the ones who are not throwing interceptions. Kirk was 33 for 44 attempts in this game, 76 completion rate. He was out of this world, but he's walking away, like Jordan said, with 2 L's on his books, right? Yep. Where like a guy like Mahomes is not walking away with 2 L's, but his numbers in fantasy are not like the same. And that's where like I think Jordan was mentioning it. Like you might think in the game in real life, it's an okay game, but fantasy wise, when you're looking at like, how many yards he completed, over 340 passing yards in both his first 2 games of the season, like that's where it all comes in, the math. And I like your team name, Jordan.
Yep, Stats Without Context.
Did anybody get a chance to watch the comeback with Daniel Jones on Sunday? They were down 28-7. 28-7. Then all of a sudden, Daniel Jones decides he wants to make up for having maybe the worst 6 quarters to start a year for any major paid quarterback in the NFL. Daniel Jones ends this game with 30.74 fantasy points, has 59 rushing yards, 2 passing TDs, 321 passing yards, a rushing TD, and 1 interception. And Daniel Jones, again, a lot of people had him because he's a QB, he was top 10 QB last year. His rushing value is always going to be there, especially in that offense. And for him to be able to turn out a performance like that when the week prior he had 4 points versus the Cowboys, and then able to do this versus the Cardinals. I'm not going to hold y'all. I had Saquon. Obviously, Saquon is one of my favorite players, and we're going to get to him in a minute, obviously, because now we have to deal with his ankle injury with Saquon. But it wasn't looking good at all. And now for Daniel to have turned the corner, hopefully as their schedule gets a little bit easier after week 3, I think we can see more great performances from him. But I was actually really, really encouraged to see that from Daniel in that New York Giants offense, because it looked really bad before that.
Yeah, this crazy thing happened during that game. They started giving the best player on their team the football, and they started scoring points. It's crazy. It's crazy how that happened. That kind of unlocked everything in their entire offense as I was watching that game. I don't understand why. Full disclosure, I did have a bet for Saquon to have over 16. That was one reason. I was watching for that as well. But I think he ended up with 17, so I cashed
17 carries. Wow.
So I cashed that part of the bet. But yeah, that unlocks everything for them. It did yesterday as well, but that doesn't take anything away from what Daniel did himself. I mean, I was one of the people in my head on the timeline to anyone I could talk to slandering him yesterday when they were down by 21 points. So I'll do the flip and give him his flowers now that he kind of was able to turn it around.
It was against the Cardinals. Let's all just put that in perspective.
That's what we all thought. It was against
the Cardinals. What do you mean what we all thought? He should beat the Cardinals. They should whoop the Cardinals. They're the worst team in the league.
Demolished.
Should they though? I don't know.
I mean, Dobbs started off the game like he was running through the Giants defense. I just said, bro, are y'all going to show up today? James Conner was getting some good carries off. I mean, legit, they were down 20 points at one point, and it just didn't make any sense. But again, the offensive line would look like it was in shambles. But again, as Jordan said, they started giving the ball to Saquon, and then miraculously the offense got better. But now they're going to be out without Saquon for 2 to 3 weeks, and that's another conversation. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but my heart can't deal with that. All right. So biggest disappointments for week 2 for you all. Who are the biggest disappointments that you saw on your roster? And trust me, if you would like me to start, I can absolutely start.
I mean, it would only make sense.
Yeah,
you had the most disappointments.
All right. Relax, y'all. Ease up off me right quick. Listen, so this player was taken for most people consensus in the top 3 in the first round. And then for most people after that, at least top 5. But y'all, Jamar Chase, back-to-back weeks of single-digit performances in fantasy. Jamar Chase had 5.6 points in fantasy this last week in a half PPR league, and he had 5 receptions for 31 yards. And again, it wasn't like they weren't throwing the ball. They had to in the second half. And T. Higgins, 8 receptions, 89 yards, and 2 TDs. Now, again, just understanding football, they're literally bracketing their defense around Jamar Chase because he's one of the best receivers in the game. I get that. But if you or I drafted Jamar Chase to be our number 1 player in our fantasy team, you're literally getting nothing from him right now. Do y'all think this is something that you should be concerned about? Or is this just something that's going to kind of go away really maybe this week when they play against the Rams?
I'm concerned about it because I'm concerned about Joe's calf. So if you told me Joe's calf is good, even when Jamar was a rookie, even last year with Jamar, he went through these blips. I don't know if it was quite to this extent to start the season, though, but he did go through blips where, he might have a few games where he was hot and then he had a couple games where he was down. But I think it's different this season because, 1, like I said, it's to start the season. And 2, it seems like their entire offense being off kilter, period, is due to Joe not being 100% healthy. So I would say from that perspective, definitely concerned. But if Joe's healthy, you're rolling Jamar out there every single week. You don't have a choice.
So with that in mind, would you be open to moving Jamar if you were a Jamar manager, or maybe even if you were not a manager, you're kind of seeing what's happening? Do you think he's worth the trade assets?
If you could tell me I'm getting somebody like a Tyreek, that might be a little high in the sky because they're the same tier. But maybe somebody like an Amon-Ra or that second tier plus another piece. So maybe you even out the volatility But you don't have as many. I mean, Jamar can have games where he goes for 35 or 40. So maybe you don't have as many of those, but you can even it out with someone who's getting you 16, 17, 18 a week. And then you're getting some also consistent performances in another position. Yeah, I would consider it. But other than that, no, I'm keeping him. But I would need a pretty good receiver back plus another piece to consider moving Jamar at this point.
What about you, Jenna? How do you feel like Jamar Chase manager should feel right now?
I was going to say similar to Jordan. I'm concerned for Joey B, and that clearly is having its effect on the entire offense. I would be open to moving him if I had Jamar Chase. Just like Jordan said, I'd be looking for at least two pieces because you're probably not going to get like a same first round, second round, like same level as Jamar. But if you get in two, maybe a running back and a wide receiver or something like that, where you can like have different options, then I'd be open to it. My player who performed the worst, my biggest disappointment after a great week one would have to be Zay Jones. Obviously going down with the injury, or AJ Brown. Injury's tough, right? Zay Jones, what are you going to do? You can't really control it. He only gets like 6 attempts before he goes down, but couldn't do anything with any of those attempts either. So unfortunate second week for him. And then AJ Brown just coming in below the mark. At least in my opinion, I thought for sure the Eagles would fly on that Minnesota defense, but it is what it is. They did do work, and AJ just wasn't the target. So
yeah, 4 receptions for 29 yards for AJ Brown. And again, you drafted AJ Brown, you got him in the second round more than likely. And again, you're expecting second round performances from him. And again, Amon-Ra, also as Jordan mentioned, went in that same round, and he's performing over expectation in the first 2 weeks so far. So again, AJ Brown's another one. Again, this is a player based on what y'all know about what AJ Brown is and how the Philly offense operates. Are you concerned about AJ Brown if you're a manager, and then also that a player that you'd be willing to move off of?
I think it's good to let the AJ Brown manager go.
I was thinking that's what you were doing, Jordan. Honestly, I'm not that concerned about it for starters, I guess. He's still got 6 looks, so I feel like, and I can't remember how many receptions or targets he had for the first week, but if I'm remembering
10 targets.
Right,
he had 10 targets in week 1.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If I'm remembering right, it was a lot more than 6. 4 more targets. I mean, come on, you could do a lot with that. So I feel like I'm not too worried about it just yet. I wouldn't move away from him too quickly. I got guys on my bench. I can bench him based on matchup, but I am surprised that it was like against Minnesota more than anything.
Yeah, they got coming up. They got Tampa, Washington, and the Rams, and the Jets coming up.
Okay, a couple of tough matchups. I'll say this: you brought up Amon-Ra, and I was just thinking this might be a bit of a hot take. I would probably take Amon-Ra ahead of a lot of guys. He might be a top 3 or 4 fantasy receiver for me, just because of the consistency. I feel like even if he's not a guy who's going to get you 30, 35 points a lot, I feel like the consistency from week to week, if you have a good team around him where you don't have to rely on him to get those 35 to 40 points, that's one of the 3 or 4 guys. I kind of want to say 3 guys that I would want on my roster. Obviously, Jettis, Tyreek, those 2 guys, of course. But after that, because of Jamar's volatility, and then just Amon-Ra being on tier with pretty much anybody else, maybe CD could be there as well. Amon-Ra's right there.
Well, I know you don't want CD on your team, and you would be talking about him this week. But Amon-Ra, again, 9 targets game 1, 7 targets this last game. But I think to y'all's point, he moved so well in space. He has 6 receptions in both games, had a touchdown in game 1, had 102 yards this last week versus Seattle. So because of Ben Johnson's offense, he's able to move around so freely, and they create so much space with his separation as a route runner. And then on top of that, the way that they maneuver their offense, even Josh Reynolds was getting some good looks from them as well. So I think Amon-Ra, he's wide receiver 12 so far in a year and a half PPR league, and he's somebody that can continue to go up the standings as well. So we'll see. And we'll get to this in a minute. Because I actually have a question about some more receivers. So are there any other players so far that are on your biggest disappointment list to start the year? I don't know. Like Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes haven't looked great so far, but again, they also still ended up with some in terms of fantasy production, some good fantasy days in week 2.
Let me think. I
mean,
would say Jahmyr Gibbs for where you drafted him is certainly one. Could be one. Would he have 12 points this week, 8 points last week? Some people were taking him as early as late first, early mid second. I would say for where you drafted him, that could definitely be one. People were thinking he was going to get a lot of touches. And the touches he's getting are valuable, and he will have a game where he pops just because of the nature of his touches. But I think the Monty injury, the David Montgomery injury for the next couple of weeks could kind of open it up a little bit earlier than was going to be expected. But for the first couple of weeks, I would say if you drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in late first and like early second round, you might be disappointed.
Well, and the target volume actually is good on Jahmyr right now. He's averaging seven opportunities a game as a rusher, and then he saw only 2 targets in week 1, but he saw 9 targets and 7 receptions in week 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with David Montgomery being out, that might be a very viable option right there. And again, I don't know if you're going to trade off him right now because you got him likely in the 3rd round. But again, that's a player that you could build your team around, and maybe he continues
definitely
to pop
a buy low candidate. If one exists early this early in the season, definitely one of those guys.
Right.
I was just going to say 2 guys that we talked highly about after week 1, Calvin Ridley, and then Alexander Mattson. We talked highly about both these players, and they come in way below mark for week 2. So, it's kind of like we talked about it after week 1, like, let's not overreact, but 2 guys who I guess even Breece Hall for me did not perform in another league, did not perform nearly what I thought he was going to do after week 1. So 3 guys who kind of fell off there.
Yeah, and then to Jenna's point, Calvin Ridley, week 1, 8 receptions, 11 targets, 101 yards, and a TD. Everybody like, oh, snap. Top 5 wide receiver. The very next week versus Kansas City, 2 receptions on 8 targets for 32 yards for 4.2 fantasy points. Not great. Hey, and look, I'm not going to hold y'all. I would consider moving off of Chris Olave for Calvin Ridley. Should I be concerned about that?
No, the targets are there, right? You said he had 8 targets, right? This week, 10 targets last week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the targets are there. As long as the targets are there, and that KC defense is better than people expected early in the season. They expect to be good, but like they look pretty darn good this early in the season. So I'm not worried about him yet at all. The targets are there. I would say if anything from that day with the Jags, that was a rock fight when people were expecting the over in total points and definitely hitting that game. Remember we were all excited about that game being fireworks, and of course, as it always happens, it's the complete opposite.
Right.
But a guy that I was encouraged by, but it was Christian Kirk. He had 14 targets yesterday. Something like that, 11 or 14 targets. Can't remember which number it was actually, but yeah, Calvin's, regardless of if guys jump him on a given day, he's always going to have his 8 to 10 targets, I think, just because he's that good. So I wouldn't worry about the little fluctuation. It just so happened to come in week 2.
So, by the way, you could have got Kirk on a lot of waiver wires because some people dumped him after the way that Zay Jones performed. He had Christian Kirk off the waiver wire for a lot of people, 11 receptions on 14 targets and 110 yards. So I guess, Jordan, as you're looking at with Jones and Kirk, do you see them kind of basically taking turns on a weekly basis to say like one's going to be the clear number 2 and the other one's going to be the clear number 2 based on how the matchup going?
I think it's going to be Kirk. I do. I think Zay could have a week here or there, but if you're asking me like the ratio, I think it'll be 75% Christian Kirk and then maybe 25 or 30% Zay, just because we saw the chemistry without Ridley last year between Kirk and C-Law. Like it was there. It was clearly the number 1 option as far as a receiver, as far as a receiver is concerned. And I don't think that chemistry just goes away off of a 1-week blip in week 1. And then you see it return right back to form and then some in week 2. Part of the thought process of Kirk being high on a lot of draft boards in the offseason was, hey, Calvin's going to draw a lot of this attention. Kirk's going to be able to get some better opportunities. But we saw that in week 2. So I would lean more towards that. And just I just think he's a better overall receiver. Zay is improved from what you thought of him as last year. Just somebody can take top off the defense. He's a little better than that now. But I'm still leading Kirk for kind of all the reasons that I listed.
Right. Oh, man. Well, so as we're hearing all this news that's kind of surrounding stuff that's happening in fantasy. I wanted to get into the trade option segment here. And Jenna, I'm going to ask you this. I'll set it up for you so you can just maybe help the audience. So Saquon Barkley had a great week. All of a sudden, he's down for at least 2 to 3 weeks with the ankle injury that he sustained running the clock out to set up the field goal versus the Arizona Cardinals. So if you are on the outside and you're seeing Saquon Barkley, what would be one, would you be willing to, and if so, what would be the value that you'd be willing to give for Saquon, given now he's in the middle of an ankle injury for at least 2 to 3 weeks?
Well, Saquon's not the only guy with that similar situation, right? You also have Austin Eckler down with an ankle injury. Guys who you're like, you expect that when they come back from this ankle injury, they will still be a number one guy, still getting a lot of yards, still gonna produce a lot of points for your fantasy team. So I don't know that I'd be up for moving off. I think you probably look for a trade or you play the waiver wire somewhere along the lines to see what you can do and leave them on your bench for a minute.
Well, Matt Breida is the backup, Jordan, for Saquon Barkley. Are you willing to spend significant fab?
No.
No.
We've seen this when Saquon's been hurt before, and this I think this is just a good opportunity to talk about handcuffs in general in fantasy. You know, for those who don't know or might just be new to playing, handcuff is basically thought to be the player, especially at running back, behind the number one option on the team at that position. So in this case, and in most cases, running back. Sometimes you get a 1-for-1 replacement, meaning the way that they use the lead back is the way they use the backup should the lead back go down. And then in this case, or in other cases, you get and really in most cases nowadays, you have no clue what to expect as far as how they use the lead back or how they use the backup when the lead back goes down. And that makes sense because the best back on the team is the best back on the team for a reason. You can do versatile things with them. They're just a better football player. So Breida, nah, I'm not. Somebody you could pick up if you don't have to spend fat money, but me personally, I'm not spending more than $1 on him, if that. But that's just me.
Where do you think the production goes? Do you think that Daniel Jones would just do more production in the offense?
I think they will do some more of running of Daniel. I think they'll throw the ball a little bit more, and then I think that they will. I do think they'll still give Breida his touches. I think they'll still have a fair amount of because a lot of you can't just have Daniel drop back to throw 50 times a game and expect to win. That's not their formula for success. So they're going to have to run the football. So there's carries are going to go somewhere, whether it be Breida or someone else. But really, what I'm going to have a keen eye on is the passing game usage with the backs, with Breida and whoever the next person up would be after him, because they came into the season. One of their points of emphasis, if you read anything, from the local media or even on the national media level, they wanted to get Saquon involved more in the passing game. And so with Saquon down, does that philosophy still hold true given whoever's going to be replacing him? So that'll say a lot about what that person's fantasy value could be, because I don't think Matt Breida, even if he is getting significant touches, if he's not getting much passing game usage, unless he's getting goal line carries or the odd touchdown here or there, which is hard to predict, I don't think he's going to have consistent enough production just as a rusher to warrant you having him in your lineup.
Jordan says all this, and Matt Breida goes for 100 yards and 2 TDs in the next.
That's how it always happens. So go ahead and get Matt Breida right now. Spend $25 a fab and get him on your roster.
Oh goodness. Oh yeah, I think Austin Eckler is a good trade. Go. I think Cooper Kupp, Austin Eckler, Saquon. The way I see things, y'all. If you ever have a high premium value player and they are on the margins at all, I'm always making moves to try to get those players, because at that point, that player is going to be so valuable by the end of the season or the playoff stretch if they're healthy, that literally if you get Saquon, you get Kupp, you get Eckler, you get Joe Burrow, by the end of the season, those are going to be solidified top 5 players at their position. And so I want them on my roster if I can. So if I was you and giving suggestions to anyone, I would say just put some feelers out there, see what the trade offers could look like. And then, just kind of go from there. Then, maybe you get a hit.
Quick note, looks like Amari Cooper is in. So we spent all week thinking he was going to be out. Looks like he's just got the sleeper notification. Download the sleeper app, use it for all your fantasy drafts. He's in. So if you still need to fill a spot tonight, looks like you might be in luck if you have him on your team.
And also go ahead and fire up that Jamal Williams. Kendra Miller is out again. So you have 2 more weeks of Jamal Williams just dominating the snap share until the true RB1 of fantasy football comes back. And I'm predicting
I cannot wait.
All right, y'all. Well, we got Monday Night Football coming up. And there's a lot to get into because we have multiple games tonight. And so I just kind of want to hear what you all think. So let's do the first game so far. First, we have the New Orleans Saints versus the Carolina Panthers. Are there any key matchups that you are looking for in the first Monday Night Football game?
Hey, go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, y'all. My speakers are having issues, so let me know if you can't hear me for any reason.
Oh, you're good.
We can hear you.
Okay. I actually really like. If I'm researching for fantasy, I'm researching for betting. So, it makes no sense to know all this fantasy information if you're not betting on these games. It's kind of silly. Like, you already have a lot of information, and you're going based off of stats, which I prefer when I'm doing betting instead of like off of teams I enjoy, right? Because that's when you get messed up and you be putting money on things, on emotions instead of stats. So right. I really like to use the stats I use for fantasy for bets. I actually think Derek Carr might go under his 235.5 passing yards line. I feel like their defense is on the pass defense is pretty good. Hayden Hurst, I think will have a good game tonight in that matchup. So those are kind of the 2 guys I'm looking at. But I think Carr probably has a worse game than he did in week 1.
Respect. Okay. What do you think about that, Jordan?
I think it's all good. I'm looking at, for me in that game, I'm looking at a couple of things. I'm looking at the backs for both teams. I'm looking at Miles Sanders. I'm trying to get a sense of how he's going to be used throughout the entire season relative to like where he was drafted. I think he was one of those guys where in the middle rounds is maybe like a 3-round discrepancy depending on what draft you're in as far as like where you're drafting him. If you're in one of those drafts with people who, back and running backs, you might see him drafted as high as like 5th, maybe even around above that. Or if you're in some leagues where, they're kind of skittish because his history is, being injury plagued, up and down usage, even though last year he was pretty darn healthy. You can see him drafted as late as 8th round. So I want to see how he is used relative to his draft position. And obviously I want to see if Jamal is going to be a true 1-for-1 replacement and have a breakout game in the absence of Kamara, where maybe you get one night out of him tonight and maybe you get one more night out of him next week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Jamal Williams, he's going to dominate that snap share today just because obviously no Kendra Williams. I think obviously you're firing up Chris Olave, you're firing up Jamal Williams, you're firing up Miles Sanders. DJ Chark is also active. So if you're in need of a receiver and you're saying that, hey, I got one more shot to try to win my week 1 matchup, would you feel comfortable sliding in DJ Chark as a flex for the week?
If you have to, I suppose. I need to see the options. I don't know.
Michael Thomas or DJ Chark tonight?
What you say?
Michael Thomas or DJ Chark tonight?
Michael Thomas. I need to see DJ on the field with Bryce in the regular season for me to like have any data points. I need to see that. He's a very talented guy. He was in Detroit before, so very talented guy. I remember, I've been a guy I've watched on the last couple of teams he was with Detroit and then Jack before, but I need to see that on the field before I can feel comfort at all in firing him up. Only question about Michael Thomas is ever his health. If he's healthy and you need to flex last minute and there's only 2 games on, I'm going to start Michael.
All right, so then Jenna, we have the Cleveland Browns versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you have any good bets that you like for this game?
I feel like both these games are going to be played like on the ground. Like Jordan, I think the running backs are definitely going to get a lot of snaps. I think it's all going to be on the ground.
I like the over. I hate saying this for Watson, and the under for Kenny Pickett on passing yards. And then, I feel like the running backs is going to be where it's at for either of these matchups. Like I wouldn't be putting money on any wide receivers tonight, but tight ends or running backs, I think we'll get more looks. So same thing goes in this game with the Browns. Deshaun Watson actually looked pretty good in game one, in week one. So I would expect he probably looks decent tonight. I also like the under in this game, under on total points. I think it's at like 30.
It says 39 on Bleacher Report right now.
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling comfortable with David Njoku?
You know what? He's not been one of my favorite looks. He's on my roster, but of all the tight ends, he's not been performing at the. I guess
you got Hunter Henry.
What was that?
Who's your other tight end?
I have 2 leagues, so I believe it's Derrick Henry in this league. Goddard.
Hunter Henry. Got Dallas Goddard. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Jordan, basically we're firing up Najee Harris, we're firing up Nick Chubb. Are you firing up George Pickens? Are you firing up Amari Cooper?
So 2 things, or one, before I answer your question, just got to alert. No timeline on Austin Eckler's return. So that's that's not good. But on your question, I'm comfortable firing up Pickens, especially with no Deontay. Like if you haven't filled all your slots by now, I'm more than comfortable firing up, unless you have somebody like Olave or really just Olave for real. As an alternative. And then Amari, I am interested to see the snap count. I would be a little bit hesitant. If you have somebody else like a Pickens, like really him, or any of the top pass catchers on, if you have MT, or you have any of the top pass catchers on Carolina, or you have like a back you can put in your flex. So some of the backs that are playing tonight you can put in your flex, then I might swap them out for Amari, because of you don't know how much he's going to really play. We saw D-Hop this past weekend. I think he only played something like 59% of the snaps, even though he was out there. And when he was out there, he was clearly hampered. So, and he was nursing an ankle injury. I think it's was it a hamstring for Amari? If I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys like that, even though they're going to play. His growing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's his growing. So even though he's going to play, how much of himself is he really going to be? And is he even going to play as many snaps as he normally plays? So even if he's out there. So I'd be a bit hesitant, but I'm not going to just sit him for some nobody, though, just because he's hurt.
Right. Well, y'all, so it's going to be a really interesting night tonight for fantasy football. We will have another episode coming out Wednesday. We have one question on a trade idea. So you basically say, which one of these would you do? So would you offer Saquon and Pollard for Diggs and JT, 14-team PPR? Would you do the trade?
JT is
Jonathan Taylor.
Oh, Jonathan Taylor. Okay, yeah. I've never seen him referred to as JT before in my life. Let's see. Saquon, Pollard for Diggs. I would want to be on the. Ooh, that's a tough one. 14. I would need to see the construction of the other teams, see where the talent at what positions is dispersed. But just in a vacuum, me personally, I would want Pollard and Saquon on my team. So whichever side of that you're on, I want those two on my team.
Okay. You feel the same, Jenna?
Yeah, I agree. I think Pollard's been playing really, really well. I mean, he was high on the list for wide receivers. One guy we didn't talk about that I'll just throw out there, by the way, he might be on waiver wires. He could. I thought had a really good game this week. Nico Collins, the Texans, bunch of yards, put up a bunch of points, and lots of targets. 7 for 9 targets. And I don't see that going down at all. I think they're going to keep looking to him. Who else? I mean, they have a couple other guys to look to, but obviously
not really, because Dameon Pierce isn't doing anything so far this year. So
and look, even if he's not, the thought with Nico coming into the season was like he's a late round guy you can target who might end up being the number one pass catcher for them. Even if he doesn't end up being that, at the very least, he's a guy who, if you're down because of injuries or buys, you can put into a lineup in a given week and say, this guy could go and get me 15 to 20 points on a given week. And he's one of those fringe guys who could actually, you could say that and say it with a straight face, like it could actually happen. So he's at the very least someone who's good to have on your bench in case of injuries or if you need him for like a spot start.
Well, y'all, that's going to do it for our Week 2 recap for X Factor Fantasy Football. We have another episode coming out Wednesday. Shout out to Jenna. Shout out to Jordan. This is another great episode, y'all. Hey, but y'all know what time it is. You want to end fantasy football content, you know where to see us, and we will see y'all on Wednesday.